Well, in my family, we've made it a regular habit not to watch the news every evening. You see, we have a 18-month-old son, just a year and a half old, and we found that whenever we turn on the news, it tends to be very negative and almost scary images that we don't want him, or even my wife, who's very fearful, to see all the time. We found that sometimes watching the news can make us actually feel worse about our situations. For example, I just breezed through some of the highlights that are on our news channels this past weekend. You might have heard some of these. One, Nemo is to hit the Northeast, millions to face travel nightmares and power outages. Now, Nemo is not the fish that was lost at sea, but that historic blizzard that just rolled through New York, and they have more snow on the way. That's not so negative, right? What about this? Police are combing California mountains for former LAPD who shot 5 and killed 3. He's still at large. Yeah, that one kind of sends a chill up your spine. Even closer to home, Detroit woman 72 shot during break-in at her house. And in Ann Arbor, our very own, right in this context, man accused of breaking infant son's ribs pleads guilty to child abuse charges. And your heart just begins to sink a little bit more. Well, maybe the perspective gets better as we look more outward. In the world news, Iraq bomb kills 31 as Sunnis stage protest rallies. The chaos that's going on in some of the parts of the Middle East certainly doesn't uplift your spirits as you sit down to watch TV on the evening news. And we just recently discovered, if you listen to NPR, or maybe not recently discovered, but North Korea now has nuclear capabilities, a range of missiles that can now reach California. So if you ever want to sleep easy at night, turn on the news. It'll make you feel great, right? No. Personally, fear can creep into our lives. Fear can come in from a lot of different avenues, particularly when we look around us. We can be tempted to be in fear. We can fear the unknown. We can fear what's next. Some of our college students here at the University of Michigan probably wonder, am I going to be able to get a job when I graduate? My parents, who just recently retired, are wondering what's next for them. Are we going to be able to have enough money to live a comfortable lifestyle for the rest of our lives? Are we going to be able to live and afford to live if maybe one of us goes into a home? These are serious questions that we get fearful about. Fearing the unknown, fearing what's coming up. Unsure if we're going to be able to retire. Unsure if we're going to be able to pay the tuition for our for our kids going off to college. If we stop and just think about all the unknown and all the uncertainty, we can become extremely fearful. Fear can begin to paralyze us and stop us from doing what God wants us to do. Now, in the biblical time period that we're going to be looking at, in Psalms in the Old Testament, there was plenty to fear too. During this time, there was a lot of political upheaval. Israel was taken over twice, with the Assyrians coming in and annihilating the north, and then the Babylonians coming in. And right around this time period is when our psalm is written. So they had seen nations rise and fall, their country taken over, wars won, wars lost. So there was a lot of instability and a lot of fear. This group of songs that we're looking at, this group of psalms, is written by the sons of Korah. We think of psalms, we think psalms are usually written by David, right? But these groups of psalms, if you look at what we're at in Psalm 46, there are 5 psalms that are a little collection that starts what we know as Book 2 of the Psalms. And it is 5 psalms by the sons of Korah. And they thought maybe it's like a little worship hymnal that they started, that they would use to remind them of God's promises. So during the psalm, in Psalm 46, we want to look at this question: how can we keep from being paralyzed by fear when life seems out of our control? Basically, when our souls are in utter despair, how can we return to stability and peace? So we're going to look to answer these questions by reading and looking into Psalm 46. Psalm 46. I see many of you are already there. We're going to this is actually broken up for us into 3 stanzas, so we're going to walk through it in 3 stanzas, just like this psalm or song was written. And this first stanza, kind of the beginning, starts off with the bookends of the psalm. It starts off with our one and only God. Reading in verse 1 in the NIV, it says, God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way, and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging. And then you'll notice in the little writing there on the right in the italics, Selah, a moment of praise or a pause as the first stanza is complete. God is our refuge, is how this psalm starts off, and then goes right away into a moment of chaos. The upheaving of mountains falling into a sea, the waters roaring. This image that this psalmist is giving us is taking us back all the way to the very creation, if you remember, the very lands of the earth came up out of the waters. God separated the chaos, he separated the water from the land, and he brought up the mountains and the seas. And now the psalmist is saying, it's as literally as if everything is just going into chaotic turmoil. The very creation pattern itself is being upheaved in this moment. Now there's three characters that are introduced into our psalm in this first part. The first one, and these actually show up in every stanza, the first character is the word refuge. If you want, you can underline it in your Bible because it comes up 3 times in each stanza. The word refuge. God is our refuge and strength. What does it mean that God is our refuge? Well, I want to take you to a place right now, and hopefully, and hopefully this is a peaceful exercise for you. But I want you to, even though it's early, to take a minute and imagine the safest place you possibly can. If you can, close your eyes, if you can stay awake, and imagine the safest place you possibly can. Perhaps it's a wide open field, perhaps it has flowers, butterflies, birds, perhaps it's a room, maybe a house, a small house in the middle of the country. Are your eyes closed? Are you at that place? This is a place of refuge, right? A place of safety. Now you're in this place, and I want you to imagine that first, all of a sudden, God, as a refuge, puts giant walls about 100 yards out all around you. These are walls that are 30, 40, 50 feet high, made of stone, secure and strong. You feel a little bit safer now. Wow, my safe place just got even safer. And then within that place, he places a keep, a tower, another, we'll say, 50-yard circle all around you of walls and towers and minarets for defenses to keep you even safer. Now you're starting to go into a place of refuge. You thought your safe place was safe before. Now God has brought his protection to that place. God is our refuge and strength. So that's where this psalmist starts, is in a picture like that. A picture of a castle, a picture of a home, a picture of safety that God has created. Now in this safe place, something happens, and this is character number 2. The earth. So we have refuge and we have earth. The earth is seen throughout Psalm 46. In verse 2, it says the earth gives away. Literally the mountains fall into the sea. Our second character will have more in the next stanza, but the third character that comes up in all 3 verses is movement. So we have the refuge, we have the earth, and we have movement. If you notice the movement here, the mountains are quaking with their surging. The mountains are falling into the sea. What kind of images are these? But chaos is unfolding. Now, many people look at this psalm and say, see, God protects us from nature, from the things of the weather related and the things that can come in. And though that is true, he is our shield and protector during those times. This is actually a lot of setting up for the next stanza. They use these same words because this is in a metaphorical way explaining what's going on. But God does protect us from nature. If we think about the storms of Nemo, the tidal waves going on and the tsunamis, God can be our protection and our sense of peace and stability through those times. But as we'll talk about later, he doesn't always protect us specifically. Right, he doesn't always protect us specifically from those things, but he does protect us in times of trouble. We'll talk more about how he does that. Peter Craigie says this. He says, the times of trouble in which God offers protection are times when chaos attempts to reassert its primacy over order, both in the natural world and in the world of nations and human affairs. So our first point is this, if you're following along on your outline. We can find refuge in God while nature roars over the earth. We can find refuge in God while nature roars over the earth. And like I said, this is in a way metaphorical. Perhaps your battle is with nature. Now we are in a much more stable environment than the psalmist as he wrote this. But metaphorically speaking, we can be brought to a place where our little world seems like it is being turned upside down, where we are brought into moments of despair. Perhaps you know somebody, or you even currently walking through a time when you're thinking, yeah, like my world feels like it's being turned upside down. I remember this was a time of upheaval in my life, was that time of engagement right before I got married to my wife. Those were some challenging times. Planning a wedding, we were young, we were 24, 21. We're trying to plan a wedding for, I think we had about 300 of our closest family members. Trying to decide who's on the list, who's not on the list. Trying to appease parents of both sides who both have a vision of the wedding. Trying to figure out how we're gonna, save up enough money, how are we gonna pay for this. Oh yeah, maybe we'll plan a honeymoon after that. That was the last thing we were thinking of at that time. It was during these stressful moments, a week out from our wedding, when my wife and I, or fiance at the time, got in an argument. And it was one of those where you're like, oh man, heads butting heads, fire flying. I mean, there were literally like, I'm sure if we were cartoons, there'd be flames in our eyes and smoke rising from our heads. And she was in Lansing, and I was in White Lake at the time working, and we were talking over the phone about this, trying to make it work out, and it just, we eventually just had to hang up the phone and just kind of go our own ways. And in my heart, I'm thinking, this is who I'm going to be spending the rest of my life with, and we're not getting along right now. And all I wanted to do was the disorder that was there, I just wanted to put it back into order. I just wanted to see us happy, peaceful, everything's going to be okay, everything's going to be fine. And I knew I could fix it, right? I knew I could put this back into place. So what did I do? I got in my car and I drove. I drove right to Lansing. I was going to surprise her, knock her off her feet, and she was just going to fall on her knees and beg for forgiveness, and it would all be okay, right? Well, God had another plan. On my way there, I started driving, and I was so I'd like to say in prayer, but probably just so not focused that I realized my car started overheating. And before I know it, I didn't even know how far I drove, but my car had been on H, and it was smoking. I pull off the highway, and this had happened previously, so I had a little tank of coolant fluid in my car. I went in, I popped the hood, smoke's coming out all over the place. I wait as long as I can, and I undo that little coolant thing, and I start pouring the coolant fluid in. And I'm pouring, I'm just watching all this fluid go, and I'm thinking, man, my car is thirsty. This thing must have been empty. Before I know it, I pour the entire gallon and a half in, and I don't have any more left. And it still isn't even showing at the level. It's not even filling up the tank. And then I look underneath the car, and I realize that it all had just run right through. And I was stuck. My car couldn't even move or run. Mm-hmm. I had to get a ride home, get my car towed, and found out that eventually that it was a piece that broke inside the engine that could not even be fixed. So all of a sudden that night, not only was my wedding looking like it wasn't going to happen, I also was now a poor kid trying to pay for a wedding, didn't even have a car anymore. You want to talk about a soul in upheaval. I'm sure you have your own moments that are even bigger and worse. But in that moment of my life, I felt a little bit of what this psalm is talking about, when the created order is just an upheaval, when things just aren't making sense. But our psalmist doesn't leave us there. He brings us into the second stanza, verses 4 through 7. he says this: "There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her. She will not fall. God will help her at break of day. Nations are in uproar. Kingdoms fall." Sound familiar? "He lifts his voice. The earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress." So the psalmist takes us from this place over here of upheaval and chaos and says, planted right in the middle of the chaos and the upheaval is a city of God. And remember those waters that were chaotic and in turmoil? Those very waters God takes, makes them into streams to bring refreshment and peace to you. In this turmoil, in this city of God, this is a look at a building, at not a physical building, but a place where God meets. And now for the sons of Korah and for those in the Old Testament, the place, would be a Zion or a Jerusalem. And if at this time Jerusalem being taken over would have been probably a hypothetical place in their mind, a place where God would be meeting, an ideal place where God would be at. And for us in the New Testament, we know where this place is. If you're familiar with John chapter 4, the woman at the well confronts Jesus, and she says, "Should we be worshiping on this mountain? Should we be worshiping over here?" And Jesus doesn't say it's not on this mountain and it's not here. It's not in this temple. But you can worship Jesus here, or you can worship God in spirit and in truth. That it's not the location that matters, but it's in that heart spot. So as we see what God offers amidst this turmoil, he offers a city. A city, the city of God, where he says, the holy place, where the Most High dwells. What makes this city the city of God, what makes this the safe place, is that God is there. He is there meeting that person, with that person, putting up the refuge and surrounding that person, providing the streams of refreshment to the soul. God is there. God's presence there. Now you see, when there's turmoil and upheaval in everyone's life, there's certain things they run to, certain common things that people run to. You can go to maybe a friend and just vent. You can run to perhaps something less healthy, like I'm just going to drink this problem away, and people honestly do that. If it's a deep-rooted problem, maybe in marriage, people run to counseling. And these are, I was going to say these are all good things. Counseling, great. Running to a friend, great. But do these solve necessarily the root of the issue? Do they bring peace to the soul? Do they bring times of refreshment? There is a presence of God that we as believers can experience and walk into, that we can have in the city of God, places of refreshment that are true, that we can experience, that are different than running to counseling, and different than going to a friend, and different than going to drink to the bottom of a can, but a true presence that we can meet with. Now, you tell that to somebody outside the church, and that sounds like a loony bin thing. You mean God, the Creator God, is going to meet with me? He's going to refresh my soul? He's going to have a place for me to run to in the midst of this upheaval and turmoil? Yes. Yes, he does. And I'm not down on approaching a friend and talking with them about turmoil. I am a big advocate for counseling and helping people walk through issues. But the one thing that people need most in times of upheaval and turmoil is God's presence, to be there amidst the turmoil. The best place to be is where God reigns. That's our second point. The best place to be is where God reigns. When we are in the spot where he reigns, where he has taken us and we're meeting with him, that is where our refreshment comes amidst this turmoil. And it's not a removal of the trouble or the obstacle or pain-free life, but it's his presence in that moment that allows us to get through it. So going back to that story with my bride-to-be, I had a moment of sanity, I suppose, or perhaps God just worked on my heart and said, come meet with me, come be with me, my son, my child. And I responded to that. Where I went and where I meet God is in coffee shops. Something about the caffeine, the sugary mochas, just helped me connect with my God. I journal and I write, and I did that. I went to a coffee shop. I got dropped off by the person I was living with at the time. Took my journal and just started crying out to God. God, I can't do this. God, the woman I'm supposed to, you gave me, we can't get along. You gave her to me. We're not meshing. This isn't working out. And that car that you also gave me, it doesn't even run anymore. And I'm supposed to be paying for a wedding, and now I have a car. God, I can't do this. I can't meet. What are you going to do for me? And I just remember thinking, God's going to take care of me, though. And I was praying and praying, and I felt this. I felt as though these burdens of a car, a wedding, a spouse. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention we were buying our first home and closing in a week. Yeah, debt. That I'm still paying today. All on my shoulders, just weighing me down. And all of a sudden it was as if God took each one with his mighty powerful hands and put it in his hands and said, hey Brian, your house, I'll take care of. Your spouse, future spouse, I'll take care of. This wedding you're planning, I'll take care of. This car situation, I'll take care of. And in that moment, none of my problems were fixed. None of them changed. But what did change is the presence of God was with me, and the streams of refreshment came to my soul when I needed it most. I experienced it. Within a week, wouldn't you know it, my fiancé and I-to-be worked out our problems. We eventually got married. We closed on our house. And it just so happens that somebody gave me a car. Gave. Who does that? Who gives you a car? Right? God gave me a car. Problems did get taken care of, but the moment when I knew I was really being taken care of was
you
when,
were down.
Yeah, was when I was able to meet with the Most High, with God who dwells in his holy place. When I was to be in a place, the best place to be is where God reigns. The best place where we can be is to be at where God reigns, where he is with us and we can meet with him. How does the psalmist finish up? Oh, and by the way, I didn't mention this, but the nations are in uproar, the kingdoms fall. So this is going back to the previous stanza right over here where we talked about the nations and upheaval, or the waters and the land. That was metaphorically saying the world is going crazy, right? It's saying nations are in uproar. It's the same word that when it says the waters roar, it's the same word down there, and the nations are in uproar. And kingdoms are falling just like the mountains are falling into the sea. So he's saying, around us, there is political upheaval. This city and this kingdom fall. But he's saying, this city where God dwells does not move. Verse 5, God is within her, she will not fall. She will not fall. This city is solid and always will be there. It's still there today. And you know what? The kingdoms that they're talking about here, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, yeah, those kingdoms aren't around anymore. Conquered by Alexander the Great, conquered by Rome, conquered by the Mesopotamian Empire, conquered by the Ottomans, whatever. Those kingdoms, rise, fall, rise, fall, rise, fall. God's kingdom, here, today, still. All right, verse 8 through 10 is our third stanza. So we had stanza 1, stanza 2, stanza 3. An invitation. Come and see the works of the Lord, the desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow, shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. And then God speaks. Here's what he says. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. So our three characters are here again. We have the earth where it says, the wars are stopping. God is ceasing the wars. We have the movement piece, where before it was the waves moving, the nations moving, and God not moving. We have here saying, the movement is, don't move. Be still. While the creation is moving, while the nations are moving, while God's city is not moving, be still and know that I am God. Don't move. And then we have our another fortress image that God is our fortress. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Very fitting that Jacob, who wrestled with God, would be here changing his name to one who struggles with God, which what Israel means, is then called, he's the one that we identify with when we think of God as our fortress, because he was one who wrestled with God as we wrestle with God when we are in political, or when we are in our upheaval of our world. So this psalm kind of shows this last part, that God acts. God does his work. God is the one who is breaking the bows and doing what he needs to do to bring about his purpose. When we're in his city, God is the one. And Moses, and this is even an image of the Old Testament, because he says that when morning comes, where's that at? Verse... the mountains quake. Verse 5, God will help her at the break of day. The break of day is the same moment, the same words that are used when Moses is at the edge of the Red Sea and the Egyptian armies are breaking down at him. It says at the break of day, Moses had walked through, and at the break of day, the waters came back and washed away the entire Egyptian army. God acted at the break of day. God is the one who fights the battles for us. And here he is acting and taking care of the situation. But we often don't like to let God act and take care of the situation. I don't know if there's anybody else out there that's like me, but like I said, I'm a fixer. What did I do when my fiancée said that she was in a fight with me and my wedding was not going to work out? I got in that car and I'm about to drive out to Lansing and fix it, right? Anybody else with me? We try to be fixers all the time. This is a quote from John Gingleday. He says, "The psalm makes clear that the city of God is not a mere heavenly community, but an earthly reality." The city of God is not a heavenly community off here, but an earthly reality. But in this city, it is not for us to fix things. It is for us to expect God to fix things. For example, I mentioned my 18-month-old son, Brennan. He's a treat, man. He is so smart. We walk into the family room, we sit down, I'm thinking, oh, let's play with some toys. What does he do? He runs up and he turns on the TV. And usually does, his little sign language. He's going, more TV. I'm like, Brendan, we watch TV all the time. So what does he do? He goes and grabs the remote and he starts hitting buttons and he's just hitting them. I'm thinking, all right, fine, I turn on Elmo. What does he do? He grabs the remote and he still just starts hitting buttons. Next thing I know, he's trying to turn, something, and he's changed it, the input, so now it's on, cable TV or whatever, and then he's changing the volume, and all of a sudden he's changing the channel, and everything's all messed up, and he's just trying to get his show on, but he just keeps pushing more buttons, and it's getting farther and farther from him getting what he really wants. But here's Dad just sitting here, watching the whole thing unwind, and thinking, this little guy isn't going to be able to figure out what little buttons to hit to get the little show, to get the show on that he wants. All my son has to do is come to me, the dad, and I'll get him what he wants. I know how to work the remote. He doesn't need to try to fix it himself. I want to help him. For the most part, I want him to watch Elmo. But he tries to fix it on his own. How many moments do we have with the remote control of life when we're just trying so hard and hitting every butt we can, and more things that we do, we just mess it up. We make it even worse. When our Father is sitting there, just waiting to say, hey, just give me the remote control. I know how this thing works. I'll figure it out. God fights our battles. God wins and takes care of us. Does this completely eliminate human responsibility? That we should, sit here and just wait? No, but there is a first initial act of being in God's presence. He'll tell us if we need to do something. There is a responsibility that we will be responsible for what we've been given. We've been given the truth about who Jesus is. We have a responsibility to share that with other people on what he did for us. This isn't saying that God will be the one who goes out and shares the message with people. No, he will use people to do that. So God acts. There's a human responsibility element, but our initial reaction is to be in the place, in God's city, in God's presence, trusting him to act and relying on him first. It's a different mentality than the, hey, I'm going to fix it mentality. It's a, hey, I'm going to rely on God mentality. So our point 3 is this. Stop. Let God do his work. Stop. Let God do his work. A little principle that I've walked away with, and these are kind of your 3 applications. It says, how can we take refuge in God? So our question that we began with was, how can we keep from being paralyzed by fear when the storms of life rage? Or how can we be paralyzed during times of upheaval, during times of chaos? How can we respond? And the answer is that when we're under God's reign, when we are under God's reign, all our fear can be washed away. When we're under God's reign, he can wash away our fear. So how do we take refuge in God? Some practical steps for us. 1, you'll notice that there's an invitation here in verse 8. It says, come and see the works of the Lord. An invitation to worship, an invitation to be reminded about what God has done, helps us to take steps of stepping into his safety. When we're reminded of what God has done for us, either in our own lives, that's why I love to journal and write down some things that God has done. It reminds me, God does act. Because when I feel like he's not acting, I need to be reminded that he does act. He does take care of me. My car and that story with my wife is just one story that reminds me that God acts and takes care of me. What are your stories? What stories do you have that remind you that God acts and God moves? We can share those with one another. How can we take refuge in God? 1, we remember the works of the Lord. 2, we escape to a quiet place. Sometimes our first reaction is to fix things when we need to just escape and be with God. For me, it's a coffee shop. For you, it might be an empty bedroom upstairs, maybe driving home in your car, turning off the radio, but having a meeting place with God. One author, Kenneth Bowen, says this about quietness. He says, the transformational discipline of silence encourages us to grow in quietness and trust by being hushed before God so that we can listen with our spirit to him and enjoy his presence. Trust and quietness go hand in hand. If we're going to be quiet and meet with God, we're going to need to have to trust that he's going to do something. Does God act? Will God act for us? Yes. Yes. Number 3 application is playing the what-if game. This was something that was encouraged to me when I was a student working with other college students when they faced a lot of fear in their life, helping them realize that sometimes their fears weren't as significant as they thought. For example, you're facing a test on Friday. You've got to pass this test. You've got to pass this test. The what-if game says, what if you don't pass the test? Well, if I don't pass the test, then I'll probably get a lower grade. And then the what-if question is, well, what if you get a lower grade? Well, if I get a lower grade, I might not pass the class. Okay, well, what if you don't pass the class? Well, I might have to take another semester to graduate. Well, what if you take another semester to graduate? Well, I'll still graduate. And eventually you get to the point where you realize, in all these things, sure, they're not great, but none of them are the world falling apart. And if you do have to take another semester, will God still be with you? Will God still be God? Will God still be loving and taking care of you? Yes, yes, yes. So that's for a college student. What if we hit a little bit closer to home, the what-if game? What if my wife loses her job? Oh, well, that'll be bad. We'll make a lot of cuts. We'll have to, move out. Maybe we'll still be able to keep our house, but then our kids won't be to college. Okay, what if my wife and I lose my job? Okay, then there's some major changes here. Then we move in with some friends. We move into the basement. Our life begins falling apart. Our son doesn't go to college. Yes, but is God still God? Yeah, God's still God. Is God still there with you? Yeah, he's still God. His presence is still there for me. Going even deeper, what if my wife and I drive home separately? What if she drives home and she gets in a car accident, I drive home and I make it home? What if? What if she doesn't make it home? What if it's just me? Will that hurt? Will I be down? Will I be devastated? Will my world be in upheaval? Yes. Will I seek counseling? Yes. Will I go to friends? Yes. But will God still be God? Will God's offer of peace still be there in my soul? Yes. What if my son was in the car with my wife? Yeah. What if my world is destroyed? What if my family's destroyed? Will God still be God in that moment? Yes. That's the what if game. Even in those deepest moments of hurt and destruction and upheaval, God is still God. And his presence and his streams of refreshment are still there and still available. A pastor friend of mine had an infant that was born, and they knew all along that this was happening at the second trimester ultrasound. They realized that the infant had a hole in the chest, that its lungs and heart were being developed on the outside. They knew that there was a significant chance this child would die upon birth, and they had the choice to abort the baby. They believed in a God who could do miracles. And they said, no, we want this baby to be born. We don't want to kill this child. The baby was born, and in the moment when the baby came out, they placed it immediately into incubation, and the heart beat and the lungs breathed air, and the baby lived. The family was excited and shocked that the baby survived birth. They had it hooked up into incubation, and they brought family in. They could see the baby. They couldn't hold the baby or touch the baby because it was in such a position, and the sensitivity of everything was so drastic that the baby needed to still be taken care of in this way. But they got to have their daughter. They scheduled a few operations that they can do, a few procedures that they can do to help this, to increase the longevity of life. But ultimately, they never got to do those procedures because after 6 days, my pastor friend's daughter died. And you want to talk about the feelings and emotions that run through. He wrote a book about it, and I read it. It was awesome. It was amazing. It made me grieve in my heart. And I read it just before I had my son, so my thought was like, oh my gosh, my son is going to be born like this too, and it was kind of scary. But he experienced a peace where he could curse God for taking his daughter. God in his miraculous made him thankful for having 6 days with that daughter, where the doctor said he wasn't supposed to have 1 minute. God's presence was with him through that time. This past week, one of my old volunteers, his name, doesn't matter his name, he's from an old church where I was a youth pastor. 46-year-old guy, healthy, runs every day. He's a lot more fit than I am. Went to the gym to work out before the Super Bowl because he knew I'm going to eat a lot of junk food tonight, so I'm going to take care of those calories ahead of time, create a little deficit, and fill up my deficit with some pizza rolls, and junk food. And he's there at the gym. All of a sudden, his whole jaw goes numb. He feels really weird. So he gets off the treadmill and starts walking down. He's at a school where he's a teacher. He sees some students, starts talking to them. He can't talk. His words are stuck in his mouth. His students feel like he's joking. Make a long story short, they take him to somebody else, and he tries to talk. They call his wife. His wife freaks out and says, call 911, take him to the hospital, I'll meet you there. They take him to the hospital. Turns out he has had a brain aneurysm. he can't say or speak any words. He's a teacher. He's the only provider for his family. His wife takes care of her kids at home. He can't teach if he can't speak. The emails that went out were incredibly, put in place of fear, thinking, she said, we're not sure if he's going to talk again. He began putting some words together the next couple of days, and I actually got to go see him at the hospital Friday and began using sentences and being able to speak some of his mind. But you could tell there were times when things were still holding back, and we don't know if he will fully get to speak again. But can I tell you, when I met this family, you could tell that they had experienced God's presence. You want to talk about be still, be quiet, and know that I am God? Mm-hmm. There's moments when we can't fix everything. And they were in these moments, and they were still. And you could tell they were experiencing the peace and presence of God, the true presence of God. We can experience those moments. There's no better place to be than where God reigns. And God's reign can wash away our fears in those circumstances with his presence. So I ask you to remember, his name's Craig. Pray for Craig. Pray for complete healing for Craig. But pray for the presence of God to be with that family. And I pray that you too will know that God's presence is real, that there is a place like this city of God, a meeting with God, that we can be at, that we can meet with God during times of craziness, upheaval, and chaos, where streams of refreshment will come and refresh us. Let me pray for you.